creatives, community, and kind folks out there. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ. And for those who are brand new to this channel, we take some random subject and we talk about it all week long. This is literally the anti YouTube, Twitch, and Discord long form content, but we do it here anyway in this platform. And that is, we talk for about an hour each day, Monday through Friday, about a subject, and we talk about it all week long, so we can deep dive into it. Now, what we do here is we will subdivide it. So we have Monster Monday, we have Discord Tuesday, which is generally when we talk about tabletop RPG mechanics. We have World Building Wednesday, Third Pillar of Exploration Thursday, which is my baby, and of course, Future Friday, where we talk about transhumanism in the tabletop RPG community, specifically referring to, say, Altered Carbon, the RPG, and Eclipse Phase, and Transhuman Space for GURPS, and that kind of thing. And we recontextualize our subject that we've been talking about. So this week is a little bit different than what we normally do, because I normally don't pose a question or pose the question in such a manner for our weekly talk, and I haven't invested in a specific I haven't specifically invested in a particular manner, or I want to say, I haven't placed my flag down on a mound, let's say. Really, what I mean by that is that is the dungeon crawl dead? If you take a look at the thumbnail, or you've seen the thumbnail, it says "save it, skip it, or slay it." Should we save the dungeon crawl, classically or otherwise? Should we skip it, meaning like, yeah, it's a thing in the past, and maybe once in a while we'll pull it out, but for right now, in our time and place and our maturity, let's just skip the hell over it. And lastly, is it something that we should slay, meaning that there was a time and place for it, but we should get the hell rid of it, right? That we should eliminate it from our not just our history, but unless you're a child of some sort, that we should just get rid of it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Is the dungeon crawl dead? So we are going to talk about this we're going to have a little bit of a definition in the beginning here, and then from then on we will move on to, and of course, interact with all you guys live on this simulcast show on Twitch, YouTube, and our Discord server. The audio only is being punched out to Discord. We've had some audio issues, so I'm going to remain just audio without the visual in Discord for at least yet one more week. So what is a dungeon crawl? Yeah, Rickard says, my answer, it's not dead. It's just finally reached a balance with the other aspects of the game. I like that. I like that definition. That it isn't dead. Now, let's have some definitions, right? So when someone says a classic dungeon crawl, like, are we talking here, at least here in the States, I remember going to the office supply store and getting those thick packs of pale blue inked graph paper. Very rarely would you find the hex stuff, so you get all the square stuff. Yeah, graph paper. Hell yeah. And going to the office supply place, the people there wondering why is the young high school kid going to buy like packs of like graph paper, and then sitting down and like planning out the halls and all that kind of stuff, and coming home and trying to do the I'm going to design a dungeon, but I need to describe how my dungeon is designed for my players, and using all of, hey, remember how we used to build the dungeons with this symbol's for the door, and this other symbol's for a trap door. The S was the secret door, and the letter C over the wall was a concealed door. There were two different things. Secret doors and trap doors were different, right? Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, Dead Man. I'm going to change that. I wasn't sure how that worked. Dead Man says, I have two notebooks of graph paper. Of course you do. Dude, I got graph paper in my back room as well. And I just remember, like, it was almost like we were mini architects or something, if you think about it, right? Putting in furniture and the top down view of maybe a statue in the room or a chest or something to remind us what was there, little pillars and stuff. Yeah. Now, okay. So we have ourselves our two-dimensional dungeon, and back at that time, it was like, are all dungeon hallways 10 foot wide, or as those of you who've come into the game during like third edition beyond, was it only 5 foot wide spaces? Um, Also, is a dungeon crawl or dungeon delve? Does it need to be subterranean? Um, could it be a bunch of abandoned ships lashed together, stuck in the muck and mire of a once verdant, you know, bay or something, but now the lake waters have receded, and now all the ships are like stuck in the mud and mire, and people have I don't know, built rickety old rope bridges between them all, and even those people are going. Like, is that a dungeon? Um, does a dungeon, does it need to be subterranean, or are we including, say, a classic castle on top of it? Rickard says, I would say that the Funhouse dungeons, however, are mostly dead. Yeah, the Funhouse dungeons where everything you've encountered in room 2A has no interaction with room CB or something like that, or 2C, or whatever the case may be, right? Like, you go into one dungeon and there's 3 trolls, and then you go into the next room and it's like, well, there's 6 goblins, and everyone's like, well, why? Didn't the goblins just hear us having a battle in the other room? Or, one room is a magical portal to some other place, and then another, part of the dungeon is made out of rough stone, and then you go one more doorway, and it's, I don't know, a verdant fields or something. Like, there's just no rhyme or reason, or randomly rolled, or it's weird. Classically, a lot of dungeons were designed like a video, like a very badly made video game. You just went to one room, had an encounter, went to another room, had some other kind of encounter, went to the next room, and what happened to you previously and what's going to happen to you in the future has no effect on what you're doing now. Is that part of a dungeon crawl? I don't know. How about the murder hoboism part of a dungeon crawl? Uh, is a dungeon crawl defined by a small ragtag group of orphaned individuals whose only purpose is to break into somebody else's home, steal their crap, and come back and sell it to a fence, right? Because you always have to have a some sort of village outside the dungeon. I mean, is that part of a dungeon crawl? Because you go into the dungeon, you get thousands, tens of thousands of gold pieces that we've never talked about how you carried back out. We don't talk about the destroyed economy of having tens of thousands of gold pieces. Of course, there's a magic shop to get more magic items to make us better at going back into the dungeons to go dungeon delving again. Um, is a dungeon crawl described by the 20 level dungeon? Remember those where each level of the dungeon physically, even if not narratively, allowed you to gain levels, and every level you went down, you gained another level. And so when you go into the dungeon, you were expected to stay in the dungeon. I don't know. Um, I think I feel like we've gotten very sophisticated in our storytelling, and I think dungeons are one tool. Like, I agree with Rickard when he says, it's not dead, it's just finally reached a balance with the other aspects of the game. So we love our social interactions and our social machinations, as it were, between like the lying and the stealing and the cheating and the deceptions and the diplomacies and such. And I think we've, if I may say so myself, single-handedly, no, I'm being stupid, single-handedly pushed the exploration part of gaming, where we go to distant lands and cross accursed deserts and hack through jungles and visit islands and go to other planes of existence, even, you know. Now, Rickard says, also, I think the pure dungeon crawl have left the tabletop RPG and entered the realm of board games with games like Descent, Dungeon Sage, etc. Ooh, I didn't even think about board games. And yeah, there are, I believe there are even some GM lists and single player dungeon delving games. I think there's one called Iron Swarm Delve, if I'm not mistaken, that's specifically a designed as a one player, single player, or a GM-less dungeon delving game, which kind of straddles the board game and role playing game kind of thing. Um, yeah, and Rickard says Dungeon Sage can be played both as solo and without a DM. So I know today is Monster Monday, so let's gear down into the kind of oh, Saga. Sorry, my vision isn't big. Let me move my let me move this over because it's kind of there we go. Now I can sorry about that. I had I had the I've got three windows open for my pop out chats, and it was sticking over in the corner, and part of the chat was sticking out of the off the screen. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. So the um the idea of the monsters that a lot of us have known, especially the Gaxian monsters, a lot of the our classic and somewhat funhouse monsters were created during the Gygax period, and Gygaxian creatures are like the ridiculous creatures that literally have an ecology based around the number of adventurers going down into dungeons. I'm looking at you, Rust Monster, and Mimic, and what's the earwig thing? If you, uh, uh, it would burrow into your ear if you listened at doors. Rot grubs are another one, although rot grubs are pretty cool as a creature in and of itself. But there were um, yeah, Rickard. Yeah, Rickard's like Dungeon Sage. Are we back at the alchemy topic? We sure are. But anyway, he says also for some reason I thought of the herb whenever you said sage and not the character archetype. That's what I was thinking of, the character archetype. Yeah. Oh, Dead Man, thank you. Dead Man puts in a Descent 1995 board game. I only know the computer game. Hmm. And is all right. So is our core essential value of a dungeon, like the core essential value of it, is it a bounded location with the player characters needing to use all of their wits to survive, both exploring and socially interacting with the things in it, and being separated from society, and doing battle with monsters that are down in the dungeon? And I mean, how do we rationalize? Again, are we saving a population from the evil of the people that live in these caverns, or are we busting down the doors of people who live in their own home, and are we stealing their stuff? Like, how do we come to that rationalization? So we have ourselves a ton of monsters, and e- even now, I think sometimes we we as gamers sometimes have to figure out a way to recontextualize the monsters we have in the game. An example would be, uh, let's go with the classic orc and goblin, right? Back in the day, goblins were like cannon fodder. They they were terrible term to use. They were the mooks of the gaming industry, right? It was just like, oh, what is that? A goblin? Great. There's my experience points. Let's go hack away at them, right? It was, the orcs and other goblinoid monsters that were taller and bigger and more fierce. They were, orcs, hobgoblins, bugbears, trolls, ogres. We didn't think about their personalities or whether we should or shouldn't kill them. It was like, yeah, kill them. As a matter of fact, in one of the first, strangely enough, one of the first modules that became popularized was the Caves of Chaos, the Keep on the Borderlands. And in that adventure, you went to I guess you could call like a cliffside, and there were a number of openings in the caves, and you were expected to go to the lower openings and then fight your way up, or was it fight your way down? Anyway, you were supposed to go to the cave that most represented your current level. And thank you there, for putting it to the TV tropes. TV tropes is in Tesla puts in TV tropes, descent, journeys in the dark. Oh, okay, yeah, I could see that being a, a TV trope. The idea of the descent into the dark trope. We've seen it. I know you can hear the kitty in the background, but she can't hear me even if I called her, unfortunately. Um, Now Rickard goes on to say, for me, a dungeon crawl is a bounded location. Low, if any, social interaction. Okay, combat and trap focused. All right. And more about moving your character and positioning to avoid traps and monsters than character interaction. Ooh, I think you stood on a platform there, sir. Um, like you said, low, if any, social interaction, right? Um, yep. Oh, Tesla Ranger says that it's not a trope itself; it's the tropes associated with that game. Mm, I'm not sure. I think there's a trope in there, even if they haven't listed it in their own TV tropes. I think there's a trope in there. Yeah, those are the grots and Space Marine. Yeah, the proverbial. There it is. Thank you, Tesla. The dungeon crawling TV tropes. Yeah, yeah. Puts it into the Discord, right? Dungeon crawling is the act of exploring a dangerous area while looking for treasure or some other plot coupon or MacGuffin. Plot coupon. I like that term. Plot coupon. Can I get 20% off? Yeah, the characters must battle. It goes on thing. But yeah, I, I agree there is a trope to that. And like Rickard is saying, um the classic dungeon crawl, like talking about low, if any, social interaction, does that mean, like, is there a reason why we call the characters murder hobos? Because there was no reason to have a family or a background or connections. Like today in fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons, when you pick a background, more likely than not, if when you pick a background, there is a social connection, right? Hey, I used to be a criminal, so now I have connections in the underworld. Um, I was a priestly acolyte, even though I'm playing a fighter, but I was raised up in some kind of religious organization. And when I travel from place to place, I can find a place of safety to go to. They mixed in a type of social interaction. Is that useless in a dungeon crawl? I don't know. Um, I suppose. Ooh, unscripted and unchained RPG review. Thank you very much. Good morning. Um, let's just say that those of us here, um, this is a timeless channel for us. And if you would like to escape the woes of the world, no matter how close or how far away they are, you are more than welcome to join in. We have plenty of time to talk about the the craziness of our world. out there in the real place, in the real spaces. Yeah. But you want to come here and get away from it. It won't solve your problems, but you may be able to return and reassess the problems that you're having in your life. Yeah. Tesla says a plot coupon is something like a key needed to open a chest, which you have to open to continue the plot. Yeah, that makes sense, but I like the paper 20% off. No, but yes, it is the plot coupon, which is a funny. I've never heard that term before till now. Um, I've always called it a MacGuffin, but I'm sure it has plenty of other names. But yes, you are correct, right? It is collecting the thing you need to continue the plot, right? Where it's it can be done very childishly in, say, television and movies, even though it's done quite often in video games, where you need to open up the door, you need to go get the key or the stone or the password to continue on, right? And you guys have heard me talk about don't put locked doors in front of player characters, meaning like there's only one answer to a riddle, or there's only one key to open up the door that you can never open up, you know. Rickard goes on to say, talking about the dungeon crawl being a bounded location. I I find that while I love bounded locations, they are perfect for adventuring because you are limited in the scope and feel of the adventure, right? Which, much like giving a player character, say, a sailing ship, or in science fiction, a starship that has hyperspace drives on it. How many game masters out there were like, "Oh, I'm going to give my player characters the way to travel very quickly," and suddenly hey Vince, so suddenly the player characters use the element that they have, and then all of a sudden there's a face palming, like, "Don't," and the dungeon master's like, "I forgot they have dimension door. I forgot they have teleportation. I forgot they have flight. They flew directly over top of my dungeon," right? Yeah. Now Tesla brings in Alien is a science fiction dungeon crawl. Yeah, we're going to talk about that on Future Friday. Like, it can you have a science fiction dungeon crawl? You know, I'm with you. As a matter of fact, I think Aliens could be considered a dungeon crawl as well, right? Yep, Rickard. Sorry, Rickard says aliens as well, just more combat focused. Yep, and Vince says, well, it depends on how you define dungeon crawl, which is what we're doing now. And is there a place for the Gygaxian creatures to be in a dungeon crawl? Right. I mean, the gelatinous cube is classic. Okay, the gelatinous cube, the rust monster, the mimic, right? There's a comic strip based around those three going out, adventuring out into the real world, right? And well, it's shaped like a cube for a reason. Is it because we used 10-foot spaces on graph paper back in AD&D age? Why couldn't it be a gelatinous blob? And of course, so many of those things were created by a wizard's experiment, right? Um, yeah, Rickard says, "Hell, Alien 3 as well comes to as well to come to an extent, and definitely Alien Resurrections." Oh, that's right, because they were. Yep, yeah, Alien Resurrection. Yep. Um, Vince says, "I once had a player who defined a scenario of mine as a dungeon crawl where they wandered through a foggy, enchanted forest, even though it was in open space instead of a cramped space." And see, I I'm with you with that because, well, one of the cinematic environs that we wrote for Critical Hit, it's called Grains and Plastland. Wow, Plains and Grasslands. Wow, that was a tongue twister. And the idea of having an open air dungeon, to me, it makes a lot of sense, right? You It's just that there aren't walls, but there are regions where you travel from place to place and encounter one thing and the next thing. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the flowchart dungeon, or the 3x5 card dungeon, where there are no walls, there's no map. You basically Yeah, Vince talks about the 5 room dungeon. Yeah, where y- the idea is you daisy chain together 5 rooms, and the word room is not literal; it is figurative. And then um, you place encounters in that daisy chain, so that each encounter then can maybe possibly influence the next encounter, and then you just call them 5 rooms, right? Vince says, I taught how this works in a workshop once. One of the attendees of the workshop built a 5 room dungeon for a social scenario. Yeah, yeah. A 5 room dungeon could be going to a dinner party, right? And there is, arriving at the dinner party. There is the speech at, say, a dinner party. Maybe there's the eating of the dinner at the dinner party. There may be a break in the middle as everyone splits away and goes into their own rooms to talk about their own machinations and such. Like, you could design a social scenario as a 5 room dungeon. um, Unscripted and Unchained RPG review says a dungeon crawl could be pure exploration and problem solving with no combat at all. Archaeology, Indiana Jones style adventure. Hell yeah. uh, Hell, we've got uh, legend the majority of the Zelda games, I I think, qualify for that. Um, what is Wow, my brain just female twin 50 caliber guns, swinging on vines, jumping from air off of airplane wings. Why is my brain not working with her name? Dungeon crawl. Uh, um, there's so I think with dungeon crawls, the exploration part of it. Thank you, Tomb Raider Lara Croft. Wow. Sorry, I was thinking of. You guys know I deliver the mail, and the first thing that came to mind was one of my customers, and I was just like, why am I thinking of Laura? Yes, Laura Croft. Laura Croft. Yes, the Tomb Raider is a perfect example of a person who not only has combat but a ton of exploration, climbing, jumping, swinging, crawling, um, the push, pull, and sliding of different things. Lara, not Laura, Lara Croft. Lara. Lara. Rickard says, I would say that if you do a hex crawl with low social interaction, it is indistinguishable from a dungeon crawl. Yeah, there are people who are have channels dedicated to hex crawling and talking about hex crawling. I think West Marches is a famous one in our RPG community. There's also living worlds that are known as massive hex crawls. Yeah, Rickard goes on to say, only difference might be that you add survival into the skill mix and not just stealth, like pick locks and disarming traps and such. Yeah. Vince goes on to say, yeah, um, yeah, Vince says, for me, Dungeon Crawl is simply a series of challenges in a restricted sequence. For me, Dungeon Crawl, yeah, 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 yeah. Now, the how do we rationalize our player characters going on this travel, okay, going into this bounded space and slaying and killing the things that are there, right? Like, what I, I want to talk about us being sophisticated and being immature about it. And when I say immature, I don't mean that derogatorily. Like, I don't mean that to mean that it's wrong, but you know, is the dungeon crawl just a place for us to have fun? And when I say fun, I mean, as players, we're having fun. Our characters might be suffering pretty terribly down in I don't know, the Underdark, running away from drow elves and mind flayers. But is it just like, you know what? We're gonna hand wave why things can exist down in the Underdark. We're just gonna assume that they exist there and ignore the realism of it, or do we? Are we at the point where we have to come up with the social reasons why it is? that our player characters are going into somebody else's home, kicking the door in and stealing their stuff. Like, do we need a reason? Do we have to say, okay, you know what? These things have moved into these goblinoids have moved into a wizard's tower. They are, raping and pillaging. They need to be stopped. That's why you're going there, right? It's the John Wick reason for blowing everybody away. Is it because the bad guys killed a PC's puppy, and this is why we're doing it, or is it well, the dungeon's there to be delved into. The reason why we're killing all this stuff is because they're evil. They remember, well, the alignment says chaotic evil. Of course, we can kill them, right? Without having evidence of said crimes being committed. You know, um, Tesla says apparently the whole dungeon shtick originated from a skirmish war game played by Gygax, Arneson, and others that involved breaking into a castle through the cellars. This turned out to be so much fun that tunnel fighting became a regular theme. Yeah, the dragon element in extended dungeon adventures came slightly later after the break in premise became stale. Stir in Professor Tolkien's Moria scenario for a little fantasy, and the rest, as they say, is history. Stir it in like, ooh, sprinkle, sprinkle. Yeah, I mean, we saw the Moria, the descent into Moria. Does that count as a dungeon crawl? I mean, there was the classic, they've got a cave troll, Sean Bean screaming out, right? Um, d- does that count? I mean, technically, they were in someone else's home, right? Um, I mean, sure, it's it's possible, I guess. I don't know. Now, Vince says, let's see, you guys, okay. Sorry. Rickard says that definition doesn't work because it's not narrow enough to define a dungeon crawl, though. A series of challenges in a restricted sequence is just a linear story. Hmm. Let's see. How about, I don't know. I mean, some would feel that a dungeon crawl and a railroad are kind of synonymous with each other. Like, you're going to go through the front door and then you go room to room to room. Maybe there might be like a split, a split in the railroad tracks that comes back together again. Um, but yeah, now Unscripted Unchained says almost every stage of um, Lord of the Rings is a series of dungeon crawls. True, I could see that with both whether they are literally underground or not, right? So I could see someone saying, "Oh, we're going to sail across the ocean, and there are going to be monsters in the ocean, a kraken and pirates and sirens charming us and such." Is the what is it, Odysseus and the Argonauts? That, I mean, I suppose that could be a quest of some sort, a different terminology, but the same thing. And you know, um, and like you guys are talking in the Discord, is the term classic bounding what we're talking about, right? Like I said, are like five sailing ships stuck in the mud lashed together a dungeon? But if you say classic dungeon, it's 5 foot and 10 foot wide hallways with exactly square flat walls and ceilings and very few curves and things like that, right? Yeah, Ogre says Jason and the Argonauts, wasn't it? Yeah, well, there was the, was it 70s maybe, Jason and the Argonauts, and they fought the Talos, the bronze statue pulled off his heel and let all the hot fluid on the inside escape out. Yeah, yeah, classic Greek stories. I, who else went on dungeon crawls? I guess if you want to consider a dungeon crawl, Hercules did, Odysseus, the slaying of the Medusa by either, I think it was Perseus did that. Yeah. Yeah. Now Tesla says dungeon crawling is actually one of the oldest ones in the book, since even myths feature it. A trip into the underworld is part of the hero's journey, after all. That's right, yeah. Traveling into the underworld, both Greek, Norse mythology as well. Um, Valhalla. Yeah, Rickard says they are a dungeon crawl, but with X. So, okay, okay. Um, trying to go back. Yeah, the labyrinth and the minotaurs is clearly a dungeon crawl. Yeah. All right. So, does that mean with this low social interaction part of it? How low of a social interaction are we talking? I mean, is it like, hey, dude, stop talking to my experience points, or or is it maybe talking to the myconids or the kobolds because you can get information that will allow you to bypass a part of the dungeon that has something very dangerous, like an ancient curse or um, I don't know, flaming pits or living statues. And if you learn the riddle, you can bypass it. And because there's a sphinx for no particular reason down in the dungeon, if you solve the riddle, the sphinx will give you the answer, right? Like, are the social interactions nothing more than plot coupons to move on, or is there a way for the PCs to go, hey, if the ogre is attacking the village and stealing their stuff, maybe we can make a deal with the ogre who just happens to be hungry and a bit of a drunk, right? Um, you know, have we has the dungeon crawl fallen out of favor with the narrative and storytelling gaming community because it's difficult to tell a narrative story style function when you're just moving from initiative point to initiative point, you know? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not. I haven't stuck my flag into the mound yet, right? Like I'm not really trying to be king of the hill with this. But I thought it would be kind of cool to talk about it because we might recontextualize what it is that we are talking about. You know, who Unscripted and Unchained says the Guns of Navarone. World War II movie is a dungeon crawl. Infiltrate fortress, destroy guns. Ooh, yeah. Hell, okay. Would you consider Saving Private Ryan a dungeon crawl? Okay, we all know that opening scene of Saving Private Ryan. Um, in the troop transport sailing across the water, landing on the beach in Normandy, pillbox gun turrets up the top, 50 cows going off, killing everyone. The main characters crossing the sand, seeing their dead ones around them is the danger in the even though there's tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people around them storming the beaches. If you follow the main character's story, is that a dungeon crawl? Is a war story a dungeon crawl, but instead of walls, the danger around them is bounding their actions? I don't know. Um, uh, Rickard says depends if the dungeon crawl is a standalone game or part of a bigger campaign. To be honest, yeah. Hmm. like let's do classic Game of Thrones, right? Uh, does Game of Thrones has have a little bit of dungeon crawling in it? I would say yes, because it had to do with a bigger has it has to do with bigger themes, right? The wall that kept the White Walkers away could definitely be a dungeon. It may not be. I mean, well, hell, it literally had a tunnel in it, and the it is a bounded location where there's you're bounded on one side, the other at the top or the bottom. So, I mean, with a bigger storyline, sure, I guess. Um, yeah, Unscripted Unchained, I'm with you. He says, "Wow, that is a tough one. I think too open world for a dungeon crawl." See, and that's the thing. Like, it's weird because, like, well, how open is open? You know, you know. Vince says, "I think the dungeon crawl." Moved away. There we go. I think the dungeon crawl is the easiest way to DM. You don't have to think about all the options because you know exactly what will happen in what sequence. Or it could be great fun, but it's hard to make it more organic or social. Um, I agree, although I suppose you could design a dungeon with where the PCs can go through different. Okay, you're bounding their choices, but they could go left, right, forward, right? They can go down the stairs or up the ladder. Like you could open it up slightly, and have them interact with some of the things inside of it, but ultimately they are bounded in a specific location. So, yeah, Vince goes on to say, thinking about dungeon ecology, for example, is hard work and restricts what kind of challenges you can do drastically. I was going to bring up dungeon ecology. Yeah, like, are we going to hand wave away the fact that you're lighting fires underground with limited oxygen, or where does the waste go, and why are there creatures inside with wings that could never fit inside of it? Remember the classic dragon at the bottom of the dungeon, but no way for the dragon to get there? I don't know. Uh, yeah, Omen says, can something be open and a dungeon crawl at the same time? The Isle of Dread, X1 might be a good example of someone who may consider it a dungeon crawl and also consider it a sandbox, meaning like you're bounded by the island. I think there might have been 5 or 6 specific locations on the island, but you get to go anywhere you want to. So you both have limited options, but you have the choice in how you interact, so your agency isn't taken away. It's weird. Vince says, just having a series of extremely random rooms, one after another, only makes logical sense if it was built as challenges in the first place. And how many of those make sense in most settings? Not too often. Yeah, and Vince goes on to say, depends on how you define open. If you mean something under open space, then yes. If you mean unlimited options, then no. At least not for me. And that's the weird thing, right? Like, I think one of the main problems with the classic dungeon for me has always been when you go into room number one. Why does it not have an effect on room 2, 3, 4, and 5? Right? I mean, much like storming a castle, if you storm a castle's wall, everybody inside the castle's like, uh, dude and dudette, you need to get the hell out of here. We're going to assemble our forces and stop you. But usually the dungeon crawl is like, we're going to go to room 1 and fight the troll. And then we're going to go to room 2, and there's, I don't know, a Naga on the other side. And it's like, was the Naga asleep the entire time? No, I think that the goblinoids would like ring the bell and alert all the enemies down in the dungeon, like, hey, there's something coming here now, unless they've moved into a specific place. I don't know. Yeah, Rickard goes on to say, okay, here we go. Part 1. I think nowadays the narratives have seeped into the game so that short social encounter with the Myconids is just um not a off rest between combat. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. And to avoid combat fatigue and giving the players a reason to rest. Nowadays, the Myconids might have some information that will give a new light to the bigger campaign story, or the dungeon itself might be steeped in the lore pertaining to the main narrative of the campaign. And yeah, what Rickard is basically saying is like, is it in the classic dungeon crawl? Is it the Myconids just has the plot coupon, the MacGuffin to open the next door, or have we moved on to the Myconids holding a bit of lore that may not even have anything to pertain to this particular adventure, but might pertain to, like you said, the bigger campaign, whether it's an incursion from the underworld or words spoken amongst a wizard's cabal that the Myconids overheard because the wizards didn't realize they were living, mushrooms or something, or the Myconids hold information between two drow families that are attacking each other, and the PCs always thought the dark elves were all aligned as one contiguous unit, but the Myconids reveal that they're actually battling each other, and this could be a method to throw some chaos into it without it necessarily being a key to open the next door to the next room, right? Because that used to be the thing in dungeons. You would socially interact with the enemy simply because that was the way to allow you to get to the next room or next series of levels or something in the dungeon, as opposed to finding out that the king's uh, daughter is a bastard child or something like that, right? Which may not have an immediate effect as you're trying to bypass the traps and whatnot. But I don't know. Vince says there is the classic strategy that you simply flood a dungeon by redirecting a nearby river into it. Takes a couple of days of work and waiting, but usually triggers all the traps and drowns or drives away most monsters. Now, listen, in real life, and we've seen this plenty of times, how many player characters have, like you said, flood the dungeon or light the dungeon on fire or collapse the dungeon? How many people have done that? Yeah, let's just hope there wasn't a magical library as the treasure. Well, if there's a way for you to unflood it, you could just pick your way through all the dead stuff and keep on getting on, right? But yeah, I don't know. Even I have cast terrible things about the traps in the dungeons, and then this is Monster Monday. The monsters that we have, a lot of them only represent things in dungeons, right? Like, how many times have we used a mimic outside of, or a rust monster, or a gelatinous cube, or Atiags? I've seen them used outside of dungeons somewhat, but there's a lot of monsters that are designed to be literally be there because player characters are delving into dungeons. And how do we fit them into the rest of the world? Now, over time, of course, with Dungeon Magazine and dungeon monster ecologies, we've figured out ways to have them fit. Like, for example, let's go back to the classic Minotaur in the Labyrinth, right? We now have Minotaurs in our gaming culture that are not stuck inside of mazes any longer. Yeah, you're all right, Cameron. We're going to talk about this all week, so you're fine. Um, Vince says mimics are actually super versatile outside of dungeons. I had one as the mantle of one of the bad guys one time. I love that. Yeah. The bad guy sitting in front of an open fireplace, and it's the mimic. The fire's just the mimic's tongue. Although I don't know if I doubt mimics can make a fire in their mouth, but still would be kind of cool, right? Tesla says, I read an article once. Yep. Tesla says, I read an article once about dungeon alertness levels, ranging from monsters continue with business as usual, they sense nothing amiss and go through their normal routine, to complete combat footing. The inhabitants expect an attack within moments and stand ready to expel invaders. And I think just because we are a bit savvy, I think some of us do have problems designing a dungeon because of that fact. Like, if you're going to bust down the door, or even not even bust down the door, but you go into the abandoned dungeon and there's things living in there, it's not really abandoned, right? Although I suppose you could claim that let's say police procedural, a police procedural where the police officers are going into abandoned homes and there are homeless and drug addicts and things like that living in and amongst the region. Um, uh, I feel like there is a possibility that I believe there's a possibility that how do you say this, that the abandoned home belongs to a particular type of people, and the PCs, the police, the detectives, or something, or SWAT, or whatever, are going into a bounded location, and that could be the adventure. Like, you would have to recontextualize it every single time, and I think when we try to be more sophisticated, it becomes so much harder for us to rationalize, like, Okay, well, there's trolls living underground. Okay, what do they eat? Where do they sleep and live? Why are there goblins living 2 rooms outside of their space? How do they see? If they light a fire, why isn't it the place filling up with smoke? Um, who who bothered to dig this damn dungeon underground in the first place, right? Yep. Dead Man says, return to the Temple of Elemental Evil. Use the DAL system. Not sure what DAL stands for. Uh, I I'm not sure. I think even the idea of like orcs and half orcs and goblins and either even dungeon alertness level right in front of my face. The It's a weird thing, right? Because part of us, I think part of us, and I'm us, really me, is thinking, well, why have I ignored dungeon delving? Is it because it's so you have to turn so many knobs to get it to fit into our perception of what a mature adventure would be that we stopped using it? Or is it the fact that maybe we don't it's so hard for us to let go of the maturity of it and just go, listen, the stuff lives here. We don't need to explain it. It's explained because, well, magic, and the things live down in there because they do. And trying to does it remove us out of the immersion because we haven't explained how fruits and veggies are able to get down into the dungeon? Or is it just that, well, it doesn't really matter whether the halls are exactly 10 feet wide or it's an exact 30 by 30 foot room with little squares? And I mean, maybe it's just the fact that maybe we are in our own way rather than the dungeon crawl being the problem. Maybe we are the problem for the dungeon crawl. I don't know. um I love myself a bunch of like Gaxian monsters, but I will admit every once in a while it's like, you know, does this really fit into the upper world or into modern society? I don't know. Um, Ricker says, I will go back to the board game versus tabletop RPG. Yeah. Maybe sometimes we even need a dungeon crawl to break the monotony. Some players are like, listen, guys, I love social interacting and I love the role playing part, but I really do want to go down into a dungeon and kill things. And maybe sometimes we need a little bit of that, to break the monotony of like the tension of a horror game, or the maybe we need a beer and pretzels adventure one off every once in a while. Now, Rickard does say I could play the Descent game and get the dungeon crawl. That's true too. There are other options. There's nothing stopping us from going, listen, if I wanted a dungeon crawl, I'll play this other game. But for me, role playing is something else, right? I I cannot disagree with you at all, wherever your stance is. But guys, we're going to talk about this all week. Um, yeah, Ricker says, but I can't play the Descent game to get the role playing of a tabletop RPG. Yeah, that is true. Um, I suppose there might be people out there playing like an MMO as a role playing game, I guess. Playing the game with the headphones and stuff in character. I don't know if anybody does that, but I bet there are people out there doing that. So I guess that counts too. So there's a blend. So yeah, Vince says there are role playing servers for MMO. So I think there's a blend. I think you could blend the two. But if you stand on one level or the other, like Rickard says, oh yeah, there are for sure. If you stand on one level or the other, I couldn't disagree with you one way or the other. If you're like, no, I love the dungeon crawl, or the dungeon crawl sucks, I I wouldn't. I think we are all right. I think it's just. We just need to. I'm bringing this up as a subject because it made me think about it. Like, where do I stand on this? Do I think the dungeon crawl's dead, or is it something that we can use and put in the back pocket or whatnot? So, anyway, guys, sorry about the fits and starts today. I will have to leave, so I won't be in the Discord very long. Because they changed our start time for work. But we will talk about this all week. Tomorrow is Discord Tuesday, where we talk about a lot of the mechanics. We'll talk about those skill challenges, probably experience points, talk about the classic dungeon crawling skills, the listening for sounds and hiding shadows, moving silently, finding concealed doors and secret doors and things like that. What is it? Bend bars, lift gates. We're going to talk about all those kind of mechanical elements and how they fit into the larger realm of role-playing games and using them to fit into our narrative storytelling and if they even fit in as well. So definitely Indiana Jones and Lara Croft and all the others, right? Zelda and the rest of them. But anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. I will see thee tomorrow. By the way, again, like this listed below, thank you in advance for supporting long-form content. Please spread the word, give a like, share, subscribe, pop on over to Twitch, become a follower, right? So that kind of thing. So anyway, guys, have a great one. I will see you.